Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As Pastor Mark said, my name is Frank Turek. Before I get started, let me ask you this. How many have heard me before, or this is your first time? How many of you are here this morning? All right, how many don't respond to surveys? We need 1, 2, 99 out of 10 don't respond to surveys. I got an email not long ago from a United States Marine, so I knew this man was no sissy. But he wasn't writing me as a tough guy. He was actually writing me as a distraught father. He said, my daughter was the top Christian student in her high school class. She won several scholarships from Christian organizations to go to college, and she could take him to any college she wanted to. So she wanted to take him to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to win the campus for Christ. And it needs to be one for Christ. So he said, we sent her off there. About 4 weeks into her first semester, I got a phone call from her. Her words devastated me. She said, Dad, I don't believe in God anymore. Don't believe in God anymore, what? He said, I got in my car, I drove 4 hours down to Chapel Hill, I sat down with her, and I got nowhere with her. What happened? Well, she ran into atheistic professors on college campus. He said, is there anything I can do? I said, have you ever gotten her any apologetics training? That's not saying you're sorry. That means to actually give evidence for what you believe. That's what this series is about, evidence. And he said, I wanted to, but I never got around to it. Is there anything I can do now? I said, well, you could ask her a question. In fact, this is a question I ask all unbelievers. The question goes like this. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I mean, if she hesitates at all, the problem isn't just here, the problem's here. She might not want it to be true, because when you go to college, you don't necessarily want God to exist. You want to do your own thing. You don't want the moral constraints of God on you. By the way, that's a good question to ask anybody, because, a lot of times people are not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest. And they're going to believe whatever's going to make them happy. The problem is, ultimately, the only way to get true ultimate happiness is to go straight through truth. And we all know who the truth is. And the truth will set you free. Now, do you think this woman, by the way, is typical or atypical of Christian high school students that go off to college? Typical. In fact, 75% of young people walk away from the church once they go to college. Some never return. Now, there's a number of reasons for this, but one of the reasons is they don't know why Christianity is true. And then they run into atheistic college professors who say things like this. This is Steven Weinberg. He teaches at UT Austin. He's a Nobel laureate in physics. And he says science points to atheism. In fact, he puts it this way. I personally feel that the teaching of modern science is corrosive of religious belief, and I'm all for that. If scientists can destroy the influence of religion on young people, then I think it may be the most important contribution that we can make. Wait. I always thought the most important contribution a professor could make would be to teach his young students truth so they could be better citizens, more productive citizens. But no, according to Weinberg, it's to talk them out of religion. Now, it's not just science that apparently the atheists think points away from God into atheism. All of these other things, these are all atheists. Christopher Hitchens, I've had the opportunity to debate him a couple of times. He's since passed on, not as a result of our debate, by the way. David Silverman is the president of the American Atheists. These debates you can see for free on our website, crossexamined.org. Of course, Richard Dawkins, top atheist in the world, most well-known. They think that reason, science, evolution, morality, evil, there's too much evil in the world, there can't be a good God, or the God of the Old Testament is evil. They think all of these things point to atheism and away from Christianity. Well, before we address these, let's go to the ruins of Corinth, Greece. Anyone ever been to Corinth? Ever been on the footsteps of Paul cruise or anything like that? I had the opportunity to lead a couple of them recently. This is a picture of Corinth. What I love about Corinth is when you go to Corinth, there's nothing built over it. You're standing right where the Apostle Paul stood. And as you know, he wrote a couple of letters to the church at Corinth, 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And in 2nd Corinthians, he's writing to the church about false teachers. And here's what he says. We destroy people's arguments and every proud thing that raises itself against the knowledge of God. In other words, we're not just supposed to give evidence that Christianity is true. We're supposed to give evidence as to why the unbelievers' arguments are false. In other words, we're supposed to destroy arguments against Christianity. I hope to at least start to do that today. And let's go back to these arguments that they apparently give for atheism. Are these really arguments for atheism? No, these arguments are not arguments for atheism because they are stolen from God himself. You say, wait, what are you talking about, Frank? Stolen from God himself. What does this mean? What I'm saying here is that atheists are stealing from God to argue against him. They are committing intellectual crimes. And this crimes is an acronym from the new book that Mark had mentioned, Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. I need to point out, the book Stealing from God is not about tithing, okay? People go, are you stealing from, is that about tithing? No. The subtitle is Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case, because atheists think all of these things point to atheism when in fact none of them would exist unless God existed. Causality, reason, information, morality, evil, science. The information chapter has to do with evolution. These are all things that atheists think point to atheism, but in fact, none of these things would exist unless God existed. Now, today, we only have time to go into a little bit on the chapter on science. We're going to spend our time on that. In fact, we're going to try and answer 3 questions here this morning. The first question is, what does science say about God? The second question is, can science disprove God? Because sometimes you hear atheists saying, oh, yes, science has disproven God, so it can't be there can't be a good God because, or there can't be God because science has disproven it. And then the final question is, does science need God? You might say, well, that's an odd question. Why would science need God? We're going to look at all 3 of these. Now, in the amount of time we have, there's really no way to cover this in any depth. So if you want to go into depth, you can get the books, which are on the book table, including Stealing from God. And when Pastor Mark and I met several years ago, he was at Willow Creek Church, and my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, were going around doing this seminar called The 12 Points That Show Christianity's True. That was before we wrote this book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. That basically is the seminar we were doing. It goes through in logical order why Christianity's true, from the very does truth exist question all the way to the Bible's the Word of God. There's also a 12-part DVD series that's over 7 hours long that goes through this like a curriculum, and then the new book is right there. Now, if you don't want to buy a book, not a problem. If you want this PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to email it to you because I'm going to go through this very quickly. What you need to do is go to this website, type this in /Omaha, send us your email address, and I will send you this PowerPoint presentation I'm about to show you for free. So just write that down. You're not going to find a menu item on our website. You are got to type this in /Omaha. It's only going to be up there for another day or 2. So if you want this PowerPoint presentation, just do that. Now, if you do want to buy a book, you want to go into more details, which the books will do. The good news is all the proceeds from the sale of the books will go to feed needy children. Mine, okay? Just so you know, I've got 3 sons, so I need some help. In fact, they're older now, actually. I was in the Navy after college, which, by the way, stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself. And my 2 oldest sons are interested in getting to the military, so they said to me, hey, Dad, we're thinking of going in the military. What should we do? I said, look, if you want to fight, go Navy. Because wherever there's a problem, we just bring our airport right there and we take care of it. Now, if you want a nice life, however, go Air Force. So they went Air Force. The oldest son just came back from Qatar yesterday. He's been over there for a year. That's where the center of all the operations are. He's got a new duty station now. The second son flies KC-10s. He's out of California. He's been over at the Middle East a couple times, too. And the third son graduated college last May, and he's an engineer in Birmingham, Alabama. We live in Charlotte, North Carolina. So my wife and I are now empty nesters. Yeah, it took us a while to get used to that. About 10 minutes. That's how long it took to change the locks. Do we have any empty nesters in here? Any empty nesters? Yes, look at them. They're all around here. You notice how clean the house stays when they're gone? I mean, we love our kids, but they are messy, I'm telling you. Anyway, there's a lot more on our website, crossexamine.org. And before I go any further, hello to the people in Access and online. For you online people, if you're still in bed, these people are already here. Come on. They got up early. But hello to you folks out there. Are you guys ready to go? All right, let's start here at point 1. And I apologize to the lady doing all the signing here. You're not going to be able to keep up with me. Do you know why? Because I'm originally from New Jersey, okay? So I speak at 150 words a minute with gusts of 350. So you're going to see smoke coming off her fingers. All right? She's going to need relief. Right? You ready to go? All right. Give her a hand. She's working hard here. All right, what does science say about God? In order to do this, we have to go back 20 years to the O.J. Simpson trial. Can you believe it's been 20 years since the O.J. trial? 1995. You say, we're going to retry O.J. here? No. I just want to make a point about it, okay? Let's look at the evidence that was presented at trial, some of the evidence. First point, Simpson's blood was found at the scene of the crime. There's only a 1 in 170 million chance it was not Simpson's blood. Secondly, Goldman, Brown, and Simpson's blood, Goldman and Brown were the two victims, and Simpson's blood was in Simpson's Bronco. You remember the white Bronco, the slow speed chase in LA, the LA freeway? All the blood was in the Bronco. Thirdly, the glove at the scene had blood from all three on it, and it matched the glove at Simpson's house. You remember when Johnny Cochran said, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit? You remember that? And the glove had dried because all the blood on it, so he couldn't put it on. Then the bloody footprints at the scene were from a rare size of size 12 shoes that Simpson owned. There was only 199 pairs of these shoes sold in the United States, and Simpson had one of them. Finally, Brown's blood was on Simpson's socks, and there's only a 1 in 21 billion chance it was not her blood, which means she was probably the only human being in the history of the world to have that blood. Now, question, does science show that Simpson was guilty? How many say yes? Science shows that Simpson was guilty. How many say no? How many don't want to answer? You know, the answer is no. Why? Not because I think Simpson was innocent, but because science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. All science gives you is the evidence. You have to gather the evidence and then interpret the evidence, and no evidence is self-interpreting. All evidence, all data needs to be interpreted. And so you can look at this evidence as a juror, as a scientist, and say, first of all, is this evidence good? And secondly, is it good? Does it point more toward guilt or innocence? A scientist has to do that. Science doesn't say a thing. Now, to amplify this point a little bit more, let's take a look at a survey about 10 years after the crime. They asked people whether they thought Simpson was guilty or not. 77% said, yep, he's guilty. But there was an ethnic divide. 87% of whites said he was guilty, but only 29% of blacks said he was guilty. Now, I say ethnic divide, why? Because there is no racial divide, because there's only one race, the human race. But there are different ethnicities. Now, why did two sets of people looking at the same evidence come to different conclusions? Because perhaps it's based on their worldview, their mindset. Blacks, understandably, were more apt to think the case was racially motivated. Why? Because maybe they had been victims of racism themselves and said, OJ's been set up. Whereas whites hadn't had that same experience, so when they look at the evidence, they go, OJ's guilty. Same evidence, two different conclusions. Why the difference? The mindset, the worldview. I submit to you this is the same thing going on when scientists are arguing over where the universe came from, where life came from, where subsequent life forms came from. It's based on an argument over worldviews or mindsets. If you're somebody who's open to God, you'll look at the evidence and go, yeah, this evidence points to God. If you're a materialist, though, if you're an atheist and you've ruled out any intelligence out there, if you think every cause is a material cause, in other words, all that exists are materials, doesn't matter how much the evidence appears to point to an intelligent being, you're going to say, nope, had to be a natural cause. You see, this is not an argument over evidence. Everyone's looking at the same evidence. You know what it's an argument over? It's an argument over philosophy or your philosophical mindset or your philosophical worldview. Because science doesn't say anything, scientists do. And you need to be aware that quite frequently when scientists interpret the data, they're actually just interpreting the data based on their philosophical worldview. They've already decided it can't be God. Why? Because they've ruled God out in advance. That's why. So the answer to the first question is, what does science say about God? Nothing. Because science doesn't say anything about anything. Scientists do. Science is just a method we use to discover cause and effect relationships. It doesn't say a thing. It's the scientists that say things, and you need to discover what their worldview is to discover how they're interpreting the evidence. Quite frequently, their worldview is interpreting the evidence, and they're not being fair with the evidence. Now, second question, can science disprove God? You hear atheists sometimes saying this, science can disprove God. A friend of mine is John Lennox. He's a brilliant professor at Oxford University. He's written several books in support of God. And he has an illustration that he gives to his students. He says this, suppose you have a Ford motor car in front of you, like a Model T. He says, what accounts for the Ford motor car? I'll give you two possibilities. Henry Ford or the laws of internal combustion. And the students look at it and go, wait, Dr. Lennox, you need both. You need Henry Ford to create the car, and then you need the laws of internal combustion to allow the car to operate, to work. And he goes, aha, yes, you see it now. Why can't atheists see this point? You can study a Model T and its engine and how it works from now till doomsday. You will never disprove the existence of Henry Ford. The more you learn about the car, in fact, may cause you to go, wait a minute, this car appears to be designed. And it points back to a designer. Atheists look at the world and go, well, we don't see God out there. That would be like looking at the Model T and looking in the engine and going, saying, I don't see Henry Ford in there. Well, of course, he's not part of the car. He created the car. God isn't part of the universe. He created the universe. In fact, to say that a scientist can disprove the existence of God is like saying that a mechanic can disprove the existence of Henry Ford. A mechanic can't disprove the existence of Henry Ford. The mechanic can learn everything about how the car works and operates. He will never disprove the existence of the creator. Again, he may actually show that a creator exists because the more he studies the car, the more he realizes it had to be put together by intelligence. In fact, let's take a look at the two types of science. There's empirical science, and then there's forensic science. Empirical science studies the present, whereas forensic science studies the past. Empirical science determines or discovers how things operate, whereas forensic science discovers how things originated. For example, you take 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part water, or 1 part oxygen, you put it together, you always get water. You can do it over and over again. You can go in the lab and repeat it over and over again. Empirical science is repeatable, but forensic science is not repeatable. You can't go resurrect Ron Brown and Nicole Brown Simpson, or Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson. You can't resurrect them and witness the murders over and over again. It's a one-time historical event. So if you want to figure out scientifically what happened at the O.J. Simpson murders, you have to be like a detective. And you have to look at clues and draw an inference to the best explanation. What murdered or who murdered these people? You can't repeat it in a lab. Now, I submit to you that when atheists are out there trying to say that science has disproven God or science shows we don't need God, what they're using is they're using the prestige of empirical science and imposing it on forensic science. In other words, look, we are just so technologically advanced. We have more computing power at our fingertips than existed in the entire world prior to like 1960. It's right here. In fact, if you have a digital watch, you've got more computing power on your wrist than there existed in the entire world in 1960. And look, we've got medical advances and GPS now. I mean, it's amazing we could get anywhere 10 years ago, right? Now we get in our car, we put in an address, and it takes us there. We don't even have to think anymore. Technology is amazing. All of that is empirical, though. That says nothing about where the universe came from. That says nothing about where the first life came from. That says nothing about where subsequent life forms came from. Those are all historical questions. Now, do you think that atheists and Christians are arguing over how cell phones work, or how computers work, or what particular treatments treat diseases, certain diseases better? No, we're not arguing over those things. We're arguing over these things. This science is much more secure than this science. This science you can repeat. This science you have to draw inferences. I submit to you, however, that if you look at the evidence, which we'll do tonight at 6 o'clock, we're going to look at a lot of the evidence for the existence of a spaceless, timeless, powerful, intelligent, personal, moral creator tonight. And we're going to see that the evidence points to God rather than nothingness. So you need to keep these two types of science in mind when you're looking at this question. Third and final question, we'll spend the rest of our time on this. Does science need God? First of all, what does science say about God? Nothing. Can science disprove God? No. So does science need God? You say, that's an odd question, Frank. Why would you ask that question? Let's go back to my friend John Lennox. Here he is, a jovial Irishman. In fact, this guy is so likable that if everyone was like John Lennox, the entire world would be evangelized already. You just can't not like John Lennox, a jovial Irishman. Richard Dawkins, on the other hand, is a kind of a grumpy atheist. And these two guys have debated a number of times. And this guy is so likable and this guy is so grumpy that one guy who was reviewing one of their debates said, watching John Lennox debate Richard Dawkins was like watching Santa Claus debate the devil. If you want to see their debates, the Fixed Point Foundation actually has them on their website. But toward the end of their second debate, Dr. Dawkins kept talking about, oh, by the way, both these guys are brilliant. Did I mention that? They're both brilliant. And they sound even more brilliant than they already are because they have British accents, both of them. Anyway, Dawkins kept talking about how the laws of physics did this and did that, and somebody in their second debate asked a question. Here was the question. Dr. Dawkins, where do the laws of physics come from? And Dawkins said, I have no idea, but bringing God into it doesn't help. Actually, I think bringing God into it does help. You see, this guy, this is Paul Davies. He's a physicist at Arizona State University. He's an agnostic, meaning he goes, I don't know whether God exists or not. But in 2006, he wrote an article in the New York Times. And by the way, as Cal Thomas says, every morning I read the New York Times and the Bible just to see what both sides are doing. Is there any water over there? Can you bring the water up? Anyway, this article, Taking Science on Faith, he was basically asking the question, why are there orderly natural laws? And here's what he said. Thanks, David. Here's what he said in the article. Scientists take the orderly laws of physics on faith, and that those laws are all expressed as tidy mathematical relationships. Think about it. Did you ever ask yourself, why is the world so well described by mathematics? Because there's a mind behind it. This world is rational because it's the product of rationality, a mind. He went on, Davies did in the article, to say this. Over the years, I've often asked my physicist colleagues why the laws of physics are what they are. The answers vary from, that's not a scientific question, to nobody knows. The favorite reply is, there is no reason they are what they are, they just are. And stop asking the question. In fact, Davies said this. After he posted this article in the New York Times, his email box was filled with vitriol from atheists. Why are you doing this, Paul? Stop asking that question. Because there is no answer for it from a materialistic perspective. If there are orderly laws of nature, there must be a lawgiver. If there's laws, there must be a lawgiver. In fact, science requires a goal-directed universe. Science requires nature to be goal-directed. Why do the planets reliably orbit the sun? Why don't they do herky-jerky things? Why don't they stop, spend a little time here, then go this way or that way? Or Why are they so orderly and consistent? Because they're being governed by orderly laws of nature. You say, Frank, gravity does this. Yeah, but what's making gravity do what it does consistently and repeatedly? You look at a beautiful tree, an oak tree. Where did this oak tree come from? It came from an acorn. But why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always become an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree? Why doesn't it become a birch tree? Why doesn't it become a seahorse? Why does it always become an oak tree? Because it's goal-directed to become an oak tree. Now, is an acorn conscious? Is it thinking, I got to become an oak tree? Don't get me off track. No, it's unconscious. Why is it doing this? Because it's programmed to do this. There's an external intellect directing it. I mean, if it doesn't have its own mind, there's an external mind directing it. In fact, forget acorns and oak trees. Let's go back to you. This is you in the beginning. Question. This is at 11 weeks. Is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? Human. In fact, let's go even earlier. Let's go back to when your mother and your father got together. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. When your mother and your father got together, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race, and you won. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool. But you were. Now, when your soldier, which, by the way, was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt and contained half of the genetic information that makes you you, and your egg, which was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence, and contained the other half of the genetic information that makes you you, when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from that point till right now. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the unborn child in the womb. Why do we kill, or we don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, they're the same. You say, Frank, well, you can't legislate morality. Newsflash, all laws legislate morality. The only question is whose morality? And we ought not legislate my morality. We ought not legislate your morality. We ought to legislate the morality, the one that Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. He said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So all laws legislate morality. The only question is whose. We might as well just recognize the true morality. No extra charge for that. Let's get back to this. Now, from this point, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second, for most of you anyway. Some cells became brain cells. Other cells became heart cells. Other cells became lung cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this day. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red. Are you thinking about this? Are you going, got to make new red blood cells? Hang on, I'm concentrating here. Well, how is all this happening? Because you are goal-directed, and the processes inside of you are goal-directed. If you're doing this unconsciously, there must be some sort of intellect that's directing you toward that end. In fact, scientists, by the way, you know what the best explanation for all this is? The psalmist had it. For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. Scientists have been experimenting on fruit fly embryos in the very embryonic stage, and they try and divert these fruit fly embryos to try and get them to become something else. And it turns out that the embryos always make heroic efforts to get back on track. We try and take them this way, and they go, no, I gotta become a fruit fly embryo. I gotta become a fruit fly. And what scientists get is they get one of three possible outcomes. They get a normal fruit fly, they get a mutant fruit fly, or they get a dead fruit fly. They don't even get a horse fly, much less a horse. Why? Because an embryo is goal-directed. A fruit fly embryo is goal-directed to become a fruit fly. With all our intelligence, we can't divert these things, yet atheists are telling us that non-intelligent processes can divert these things and have them become other kinds of animals. Nonsense. The world is goal-directed. If it's goal-directed, there must be a mind behind it. Now, who thought of this first? You know who thought of this first? Aristotle. Aristotle, 400 years before Christ, said nature's goal-directed. He called it final causality. There's a final goal, a final target that things are heading toward. It's sometimes called teleology. We'll talk about this tonight. There's design in the universe. And when you're thinking, it's called intentionality. Like, for example, this morning, you intended to come to church. That's why you're here. You had a goal-directed thought. And in fact, as you're sitting here right now, regardless of what you're thinking about, I hope you're thinking about what we're talking about, but I know maybe you're not. Regardless of what you're thinking about, your thoughts are goal-directed. And they depend on a series of goal-directed processes over which you have no control. For example, you're having a free will thought right now, whatever that is. In order for you to have a free will thought right now, the neurons in your brain have to be acting properly. In order for the neurons in your brain to act properly, the atoms that make up the neurons have to act as they do, consistently and reliably. In order for the atoms to act consistently and reliably, the natural forces, the four natural forces we know about, the strong and weak nuclear forces, gravity and electromagnetism, have to do what they do repeatedly and reliably. Now, are any of these things conscious here? Well, what causes the natural forces to do what they do? That's the big question. You know what Aristotle said? The unmoved mover. We would say the external intellect is God. In fact, Aristotle said it was the unmoved mover that did it. Paul comes along and says, it's God, it's Yahweh that does it. All these goal-directed forces that are happening right now as you sit here are being directed toward an end by an external intellect. In fact, Paul put it this way: Christ is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Paul goes up on Mars Hill in Athens. If you've ever been to Athens, you know where that is. Right where Aristotle surely was 400 years prior. And Paul says this: in Christ we live and move and have our being. He's actually quoting a Cretan philosopher or prophet, a Cretan philosopher who said, in Zeus we live and move and have our being. But Paul takes that and he says, no, in Yahweh, in Christ, we live and move and have our being. He's holding us together right now as you sit here. If there is a goal-directedness to nature, somebody must be directing it. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. When the band was up here earlier, they created and sustained the music by playing. What happened to the music the second they stopped playing? The music was over. The same thing is true with God. He creates the universe and he creates you, and he sustains the universe and he sustains you. If he were to stop sustaining you and me, we'd all go out of existence. So, this man was an atheist who said a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. This man is Fred Hoyle. He was one of the top atheists of the last century. And after he saw this, and particularly the fine-tuning argument for the universe, which we'll see tonight at 6 p.m., this guy said, hey, there's got to be a mind behind all this. There is a mind behind it. That mind is God, who created and sustains the universe. So I'm saying that God makes science possible. He sustains goal-directed natural laws. So when atheists say there is no need for God because natural laws can explain everything, they are stealing from God, who is the author and sustainer of natural laws. That's the point. They're trying to say, oh, we don't need God, we've got natural laws. You-hoo, where'd you get natural laws from? And why are they so consistent and precise and reliable? Why is there so much goal-directedness in nature? Because there's a goal director. In fact, God is continually present to you right now. He sustains you right now. He's here. His power is present right now as we speak. He's holding us together. He's directing us toward an end. And as the ancient texts say, in him we live and move and have our being. So science requires a being like God to even work. There would be no ability to do science or ability to know anything unless God existed. So, summary. What does science say about God? Nothing. Science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. And sometimes, quite frequently, it's their philosophical presupposition which prevents them from interpreting the scientific data properly. We're going to see some of that evidence tonight. Can science disprove God? No, science can't disprove God. A scientist can't disprove God any more than a mechanic can disprove the existence of Henry Ford. It's silly to say that. The third question is, does science need God? Yes. There would be no such thing as science if there wasn't an orderly natural world. And the only way we have an orderly natural world is because things are goal-directed, because there's a mind out there directing them as we sit here. Regardless of whether the universe had a beginning, by the way. Tonight we're going to see evidence that the universe did have a beginning, but you don't even need a beginning of the universe to need God. In fact, Aristotle believed the universe was eternal, and he said, even if the universe is eternal, there has to be an uncaused cause that sustains or creates and sustains all change. This guy's a pagan. He didn't even have the scriptures, and he knew this. He just thought about it in a goal-directed way. Now, if you want to go deeper, the books and the DVDs are out there. But again, you can get this presentation for free. If you type this in your browser and give us your email address, we'll send it to you. We're also on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. We've got a YouTube channel. We put a lot of YouTube videos up there. They're very short videos because some of them are taped on a college campus when I'm interacting with atheists during Q&A, so you can share those with others. Just sign up for our YouTube channel. It's called Turek Video. And then we're on Twitter. We're also on Facebook. If you like our Facebook page, that would be good. And by the way, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've combined these three into one social media platform. We call it UTwitface. Okay? It's kind of a New Jersey thing. You may want to sign up for it. We have TV every week on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Central and midnight Central. DirecTV channel 378. How many people here have DirecTV? Can I see your hands, please? DirecTV. Like 6 of us. Come on. Friends don't let friends watch cable. If you want to get I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, you got to get DirecTV. Actually, that's not true. If you go to our website, crossexamine.org, at that time, you can watch the show streaming live. We're also on radio every Saturday morning at 9 a.m., and I don't know if it's on here in Omaha, but it's podcasted, it's on iTunes, and it's also on our new app. If you don't have our new app, it's almost 2 years old now. There's been almost over 57,000 people have downloaded this app because it has all these radio shows we do once a week. And it also has a quick answer section. I want to tell you about this quick answer section. Suppose you're having lunch with somebody and they say something against Christianity and you're not quite sure how to answer it. You take out your iPhone or your iPad, you go to the quick answer section of the Cross-Examined app, and chances are the objection they brought up, we have a short answer to right there in the app. So download it, it's free. And then tonight, while it might not be free, it may be, what, $10 to get in tonight? I don't know, something like that. Come tonight because we're going to go into the evidence for God tonight from science, or from the process of doing science. Remember, science doesn't say anything scientists do. And we're going to go into that tonight. Today I was just trying to set the table as to why we need God for science, but now we're going to actually look at the evidence tonight at 6 p.m., and everybody's welcome, so come back then. And why do you want to do this? Because you don't want this happening to you. You don't want to get that call one day from your son or daughter or grandson or granddaughter that says, hey, I don't believe in God anymore. And they don't believe in God anymore for a reason that, frankly, is not a good reason. So you ought to be ready. You ought to be ready with the evidence, and you ought to be able to destroy arguments that are against the Christian worldview. Let's pray. Father, we thank you that you've given evidence, that you've made this a goal-directed world, that we could know you by what you've done. I pray for Pastor Mark and others that are serving over in Mali right now. Africa needs your attention just like we do. I pray that you'd continue to encourage people here. You continue to make disciples here who can go out and be great ambassadors for you. And I pray that we'd be able to share this information not only with believers but with unbelievers and give them a good reason as to why we believe what we do. I thank you for all these things in the name of Christ. Amen.